It seems like in Israel after October 7th, saying you believe in peace is like saying you believe in aliens. But it hasn't always been this way. In the 90s, massive crowds lined the streets of Tel Aviv, celebrating a new era of peace. Israeli and Palestinian leaders signed historic agreements, shook hands, even shared a Nobel Prize. But the promise of peace never materialized. Every negotiation since has blown up in our faces, sometimes literally. And today, 2/3 of Israelis believe that peace with the Palestinians is impossible. So, are they right? Is the Israeli-Palestinian peace process doomed? I'm gonna level with you. This is one of the hardest videos I've ever done. Because on the one hand, I'm kind of a peace activist myself.
We agree on a lot, obviously, as we've grown closer as friends and comrades in this.
I truly believe that peace between Israelis and Palestinians is possible. It's an article of faith for me, a prophetic aspiration that I know will come true. But prophetic aspirations don't follow a human timeline. Sometimes it's hard to believe that peace will come in my lifetime, no matter how fervently we work towards it. In my darkest moments, I worry that things will get much worse before they get better. I was 19 years old when I returned here, just in time for a wave of stabbings. Palestinian youth prowled the streets with kitchen knives and screwdrivers, looking for a victim to bear the brunt of their hopelessness and rage. Many never returned from their gruesome errand, taken out by soldiers or armed bystanders. It was a grim welcome home. But I knew firsthand that it didn't have to be that way. I'd grown up watching my grandfather model coexistence in a Jewish state. He lived his life in both Hebrew and Arabic, building a home that was open to everyone. That was the world I wanted for myself. I knew it was possible. I just didn't know how. Because by the time I returned to Israel, the so-called peace camp was gone. Israeli leftists were jumping ship, leaving a tiny core of activists who seemed increasingly out of touch with your average person.
In the 90s, the Israeli left really takes on peace as its kind of identity. Those who opposed it intensely, and those who supported it passionately. But then the Second Intifada begins. Almost 140 suicide bombings in 3 years, many of them by the peace partners, by Fatah.
Fatah is the Palestinian political party that signed the Oslo Accords. They were supposed to be the moderates within Palestinian society. But less than 10 years after Oslo, they were sending men strapped with explosives to blow themselves up in Israeli markets, buses, and cafes.
And Israelis start asking themselves, was there ever an actual peace? Was there any peace on offer, or was this just tactical and empty and not real?
But the more I listened to the leaders of the peace establishment, hoping to be energized and inspired, the more frustrated I became. These old school activists seem totally disconnected from your average Israeli or Palestinian. They sketched out a gorgeous future of peace and prosperity, but neglected to provide a map to this destination or demonstrate a complete grasp of the obstacles to this peace and prosperity. So I stopped listening to them for a while. Instead, I set my sights on something a little more pragmatic: connection, bridges, friendship, healthy debate. I learned Arabic. I made friends in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I used my platform to showcase both sides of our story. Because I believe deeply that Israelis and Palestinians are family, born of the same land, children of the same God. And I don't think either one of us needs to give up on our history, our identity, or character to honor the other. It's not a zero-sum game. There's room for all of us. Then came the horror of October 7th and nearly 2 years of crushing, grinding, unrelenting horror. Israelis and Palestinians are both exhausted. And I don't blame anyone who feels like this. And yet, somehow a handful of activists continue to fight.
Would you describe yourself as a peace activist?
I would.
Peace activists, peace builders, peace entrepreneur. I'm happy with it.
I'm not just a peace activist. I am an activist who wants and demands a better life.
They're a minority, and they'll be the first to tell you they don't have all the answers. But they have energy. They have hope. And that's why I sought them out. Not because I thought we'd all agree, not because anyone has a perfect solution, but because these are the dreamers from across the political spectrum who are still showing up to dream. And I wanted to understand why. I wanted that shot of electricity that seems to power them all. So I began with Maoz Yinon, who has more reason than anyone to give in to despair.
My parents were among the first victims of the Hamas attack. early morning of October 7th. So that's my father, my mom.
Do you hate Hamas?
I hate no one. I'm practicing radical forgiveness. I have no hate, I don't mad, I'm not angry about no one. I will speak in dialogue with anyone that is willing to speak in dialogue with me. My only mission and my only goal is to make peace.
Maoz has every reason to be angry or hateful, to say peace is impossible, but he's chosen the opposite path. And he says he's not alone.
We are doing the People Peace Summit in Jerusalem. More than 60 civil society organizations, Jewish and Arabs, Palestinian Israelis, international support. 2 days, the biggest peace rally the Middle East has seen, I don't know for how many decades. I'm meeting with a group of ultra-Orthodox Jewish. We are forming a new group, a new movement that will be called Haredim LaShalom. Shalom is not a political agenda. It's not left or right. Shalom is within each one of us.
Like every other activist I spoke to for this video, Maoz genuinely believes that the first step towards peace is recognizing just how much we have in common. Rula Daoud agrees. As the national co-director of Israel's largest grassroots Jewish Arab peace movement, she spends a lot of time community organizing. Her work is based on the radical idea that at the end of the day, Israelis and Palestinians are fundamentally just people.
We are a grassroots movement of both Jews and Palestinians who live inside of Israel. Our theory of change is very simple and very basic. We do believe that most of the people living in here want the same things. If you will put a bunch of people in one room, you will ask, do you want to live in safety? All of the people who are sitting in the same room will raise their hand. And if you will ask them, do you want to live in a place where you have good salary? All of them will raise their hands. And if you ask them, do you want to live in a place where you have peace and security? All of them will raise their hands.
And all of that is an effective starting point, but it's hard to ignore the elephant in the room. What about people who don't want the same things? People who would rather destroy than create. People who have committed themselves to wrecking every single opportunity we've ever had for peace.
מדינה פלסטינית לא יכולה לקום כי אין דבר כזה עם פלסטיני.
الحياة قتال وليس الحياة مفاوضات مع بني إسرائيل ولكنها أو مع اليهود.
People who believe fully and genuinely that the other side must be destroyed.
כל ילד, כל תינוק בעזה הוא אויב.
16 قتيل صهيوني دوي الانفجار بالفعل
كان قوي جدا يعني فأنا مباشرة يعني أنا لا أخفيك أني تضايقت أردت العدد من البداية أن يكون أكثر.
People who are religious extremists.
כל עזה וכל ילד בעזה צריך למות מרעב.
כי מבחינת האסלאם, יהודים לא יכולים להקים מדינה.
Dr. Yehuda Yamini is not a peace activist. He began his career in the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security service, and currently spends his days negotiating with the Palestinian Authority over infrastructure and water rights. Like Maoz, he's Jewish. Like Rula, he's fluent in Arabic. But unlike both of them, he believes this conflict is deeply rooted in religion.
טעות להתייחס לפלסטינים כאויבים היחידים בסכסוך הזה, או כהצד היחיד בסכסוך הזה. זה ממש לא נכון. בסכסוך הזה שותפים כל המוסלמים בכל העולם. ומבחינת האסלאם, עד ימינו, ליהודים יש משבצת מאוד ברורה איך הם אמורים לחיות בעולם. הם אמורים להיות בני חסות. המשמעות של הדבר הזה, שיהודים לא יכולים להקים מדינה, הם לא יכולים לקיים אוטונומיה, הם לא יכולים לשלוט לא על עצמם ולא על עם אחר. מוסלמים בכל העולם כולו רואים בתופעה של מדינת ישראל כמדינה יהודית, אנומליה, שנוגדת את האמונה המוסלמית, נוגדת את האסלאם, נוגדת את הקוראן.
Dr. Yemeni points to the anti-Jewish riots of the 1920s and 30s, to the religious rhetoric that Palestinian and other Arab leaders have used to inflame tensions, to the fact that the Palestinian cause has become an international rallying cry for Muslims worldwide. And he's not alone in that perspective.
Do you think that peace is possible?
Currently, I am not sure right now. I don't think it's so simple. I think you can't kill an idea. So 1.8 billion Muslims in the world that have a very strong belief in killing all the Jewish people. So until we change that, I don't know how that's possible.
I gotta push back on this, because we're not serving anyone by making sweeping statements about the world's 2 billion Muslims, most of whom would be very surprised that they believe that they have a religious obligation to get rid of us. What Dr. Yemeni is talking about, and certainly what this woman is talking about, is the subset of radical Islamists like Hamas or Hezbollah or the Islamic Republic of Iran, who see the conflict in starkly religious terms. I mean, they say it themselves.
ولذلك أخي الكريم الإثخان في هذا العدو أمر إلهي. الإثخان في عنق هذا العدو واجب شرعي.
عاصمة لفلسطين فقط كدولة مستقلة وإنما ستكون عاصمة للخلافة الإسلامية.
To the Israeli mind, Hamas isn't fighting against occupation. It isn't fighting for Palestinian rights. There are theocrats who themselves don't give Palestinians freedom under their own rules. So for the huge majority of Israeli Jews, probably 80% of Israeli Jews share this narrative.
Even the most peace-loving Israeli will admit that this narrative doesn't leave us much room to maneuver. It's more or less impossible to reason with religious extremists who believe that destroying you is their sacred duty.
חמאס זה חמאס. החמאס לא עושים שלום כי הם לא רוצים שלום איתנו. הם רוצים להרוג אותי. מי שרוצה להרוג אותך, אתה לא רוצה שלום. אבל צריך ליצור אווירה של שלום. זהו, ברגע שהחמאס יחליט שהוא משנה את הכיוון שלו וידבר שלום, אפשר לדבר איתם.
Talk to Hamas? Hamas doesn't want to talk. They've made that abundantly clear. But consider this. Hamas won't always be in power, and governments can enact great change. Just a couple decades ago, Saudi newspapers were publishing anti-Jewish blood libels. Saudi textbooks were once full of anti-Semitic propaganda that described all Jews as treacherous and cited the protocols of the Elders of Zion as a reputable historical source. But just a few years ago, the Saudi government removed most, though not all, of these anti-Semitic tropes. And normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia isn't a question of if, but a question of when.
If you were to characterize it, are you close? Every day we get closer. It seems it's for the first time a real one.
Things can change. Things have changed. And that is what many Israelis are holding on to.
We need to find a way of living together, recognizing the other, the rights of the other, the pain of the other, and find together a dignified future.
אז איך אנחנו מגיעים לשלום?
צריך לדבר, לא לראות, לדבר.
מה זאת אומרת, לדבר עם מי?
יש לנו הרבה מדינות, יש לך את סעודיה, יש לך את מצרים, יש לך את ירדן.
The Arab countries are ready. This is something that today is possible. It wasn't possible before. Today is possible.
צריך לחזק את המדינות המתונות, וצריך למצוא תהליך לשלום.
But what do you do with a group like Hamas, which has proven very unwilling to change their direction? And what do you do to show Jews and Israelis that the problem isn't with Islam per se, but a twisted Islamist version of it? Because there are two truths at play here. The first is that Hamas are extremists whose radical version of Islam leaves no room to negotiate. The second is that Islam might still play a role in bridging the chasm between Israelis and Palestinians. And no one knows better than Rabbi Yaakov Nagen, who has been involved in peace work and interfaith dialogue for more than 20 years. Rabbi Nagen genuinely believes that if religion is part of the problem, it should also be part of the solution. And his take was unexpected.
I have a profound respect for Islam. I've studied for many years, and I feel that if Islamic identity has been weaponized against the Jewish people, we must speak the truth of Islam and the path of Islam. Look, I teach at Yeshiva in Otniel. 8 of my students have been killed since October 7th. What I feel is necessary for Israel to realize that the world is bigger than this. I feel we are falling into the hands of evil enemies by assuming that they are the one and only authentic expression of their religion, of their peoples, and this empowers them. And the way to respond is to isolate them, to speak the truth that they are a perversion of their religions, and finding that we don't have to be alone, that we have allies throughout the world, and stand together for the sake of Jews, Muslims, Israeli, and Palestinians.
In other words, the version of Islam he knows is much different than the version that Dr. Yemeni has experienced. And his warning to Israelis is not to assume that Hamas speaks for everyone. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza do not live in a free society.
We have pretty good polling on this for decades. A great many Palestinians desperately wanted the peace to work. Their ideological leadership, who never asks their opinion, was committed to not having it work. Not everybody. There were leaders in Fatah who were horrified at the Second Intifada and wrote against the Second Intifada.
I am a Palestinian citizen of Israel. I do vote for the Israeli Knesset, so I don't really have an influence on the West Bank. But when I look at the leadership that we have right now, I see that some people in the West Bank, maybe also young people, are not very much satisfied with the leadership that they have. They view it as an old, corrupt leadership, and we see it even on social media. There has been, a survey done in Gaza before October the 7th. More than 62% of the people said they don't see Hamas as a leadership, and this was before the 7th of October.
But Rula, like Haviv, like Dr. Yamini, also points out that Palestinian society is far more radical today, especially after October 7th, which isn't surprising considering the level of destruction in Gaza right now. Not to mention that many Palestinian children in both the West Bank and Gaza receive an education that is, to put it mildly, not entirely flattering to Jews.
מי שמכיר ורואה את ספרי הלימוד שלהם, זה פשוט הסתה ותעמולה שהנאצים היו יכולים להתגאות בה. השימוש באנטישמיות הנוצרית הקלאסית במובן הכי טהור שלה.
And that is why so many of the Israelis I spoke to emphasize that nothing will change without education.
מהרגע שהם נולדים, יוצרים בהם, נותנים להם אנטיגוניזם אלינו. אז אני חושבת שזה מתחיל בחינוך, אולי לעשות חינוך משותף. גם ליהודים, גם להם ביחד.
It's easier said than done. But Dr. Yemeni reminded me of something important. History could have unfolded in infinite ways. And so could the future.
היו דעות של מוסלמים שראו בשיבת ציון התגשמות של נבואה קוראנית שמופיעה בסורה 17, סורת אל-איסרא' ואל-מיעראג', בפסוק 104, ששם מדובר על כך שאללה באחרית הימים יקבץ את בני ישראל. ולפני יותר מ100 שנה היו אנשים שהאמינו שזו בעצם התגשמות הנבואה הקוראנית. היו אפילו אגודות שקמו כדי לשתף פעולה עם נוצרים, מוסלמים ויהודים כדי לפתח את הארץ.
Those moderate voices were eventually eliminated by extremist Islamist factions. But for a short time, they existed, which means they can exist again. In fact, they exist right now. Some of them are speaking out, while others are hiding in plain sight until it's safe to go public. And that day might come sooner than we think, as Hamas's grip on Gaza continues to weaken. And the weaker Hamas becomes, the greater our opportunity.
יש פה חלון הזדמנויות, כי בעצם גם בעולם האסלאם מחפשים היום פתרונות. אם אנחנו ניקח את 100 השנה האחרונות, ההיסטוריה מלמדת, תמיד היה שחקן מוסלמי שנלחם נגדנו. כרגע חיזבאללה התפרק מנשקו. חמאס בדרך לשם, ואיראן גם כן אני מאמין שזה מה שיקרה. כרגע אין שחקן פיזי שבא להילחם נגדנו, ולכן כרגע יש לנו הזדמנות. אם אנחנו נעדד את הגישה הזאת בצורה משמעותית לתוך העולם הערבי, שיבת ציון זה בנו ישראל ולא יהוד, אני מאוד אופטימי. אני חושב שזה מה שיביא לשינוי, ובסופו של דבר אולי גם לשלום.
I gotta say, I expected this kind of optimism from someone like Rula or Maoz. I did not expect it from someone who spent part of his career in the security services. I've never been so happy to be wrong. But behind all this energy and infectious hope lies a massive and impossible question. Sure, Israelis and Palestinians are just people like you and me. Sure, both sides need to strengthen their moderates. Sure, both sides need to defeat their extremists. And yeah, we need the kind of visionary leaders who can inspire us to fight for a different future. But what does that future look like? Like, in a practical sense? What do we mean when we talk about peace? Are these activists fighting for a single binational state that is neither Jewish nor explicitly Palestinian? Are they still dreaming of the two-state solution? Are they envisioning a confederation arrangement? It probably won't surprise you to hear that every person I spoke to had a different answer to this question. But more importantly, they were flexible. No one had the answer, just lots of different ideas, each with their own pros and cons.
To have two disconnected states, I think would be lose-lose for both sides. I've written extensively about a play on the European Union, the Abrahamic Union, having a Jewish state and then certainly a Palestinian political entity. We discussed how it's defined, allowing a situation that there are open borders, that Palestinians freely travel and entry to all parts of what they see as their homeland. But for Jews to continue living in Judea and Samaria, to find a way that all will feel connected to places that give their identity. And it will be a blessing for all of us.
Rabbi Nagin's point is an interesting one. He says we should stop thinking about the solution in terms of two completely separate entities. Instead, he asks, what if we treated it like the EU? Open borders, free travel, like it was in the 80s and 90s before checkpoints and fences and men sneaking into Israel strapped with explosives.
If in 10, 20, 50 years we will live in a one state for all, or I don't know what kind of a name it will give us. I am fine by it as long as people are fine by it.
And though it's hard for me to imagine a scenario in which Israelis and Palestinians live in peace in a single state, Rula is making a much larger point. We cannot predict or preempt the future. Let's remain open to all possibilities.
The main thing that we need and must achieve is the understanding that all of us deserve the same things, which are freedom, independence, equality, liberty for all of us. Once we reach that point, we can build upon what is the solution.
No matter how they envisioned peace, nearly every person I spoke to pointed to the same story as evidence of what is possible. And that's the story of two unlikely leaders making peace. Egypt and Israel were once sworn enemies. Through the 1950s, Egypt funded infiltrators to sneak into Israel and wreak havoc. Hundreds of Israelis lost their lives this way. Radio Cairo broadcast daily threats. Egypt was so much larger, more powerful, and better supplied than Israel that in 1967, Israeli citizens prepared for the war everyone knew was coming by digging 10,000 graves. That's how intense the hostility was. That's how great the fear. In 1973, a new Egyptian president struck hard, fast, and suddenly. The Yom Kippur War of 1973 was the most devastating surprise attack in all of Israeli history until October 7th, 50 years later. More than 2,000 Israeli soldiers lost their lives, a staggering number for such a tiny country. And yet, just a few years later, the president of Egypt said something surprising in a speech to his parliament. I'm willing to go as far as Jerusalem. From Jerusalem, the Israeli prime minister was listening, and he responded by saying, "Welcome."
And Sadat came to the Knesset and he had a speech, and he spoke about peace.
Let us have no war after October, and let us agree upon security.
And until this day, the borders that you have between Egypt and the ones that you have between Israel and Jordan are the safest borders. And it is because there is peace.
Egypt and Israel had been the most bitter enemies. But Malus points out that peace sometimes comes from the most unlikely places.
The genocide of Rwanda. 2 tribes within one nation. Genocide. 1 million casualties. A priest murdered with bare hands. Husband murdered his parents-in-law. Students murdered their teacher and their class friends. And then after 3 months, with more than 1 million casualties and 500,000 cases of rape, they woke up from this psychotic nightmare they were within for 3 months, and they realized that the only way forward is to reconcile.
It's a beautiful idea and an important moment in history. But all these activists are leaving out an important part of the story. Things often get worse before they get better. Germany and Japan were brought to their knees before World War II could officially end. Rebels overran Rwanda's genocidal regime, and many of the perpetrators and inciters fled. And in 1973, the IDF completely surrounded the Egyptian Third Army, giving them no choice but to surrender. In contrast, the war in Gaza seems to be operating under a different playbook. Despite massive damage and a spiraling body count, Hamas has not fled or surrendered, at least not yet, and it's hard to know where this is going. But whenever I'm tempted to feel discouraged, even hopeless, I think about Israel's first prime minister. David Ben-Gurion was born before there even was an Israel. He lived through 2 world wars, 2 foreign occupations, and the most systematized genocide in history. But he never gave up fighting for the Jewish homeland. Those efforts paid off eventually. At 62 years old, he stood in the basement of the Tel Aviv Museum and spoke a Jewish state into being. Despite everything, that state is still standing. Because as he famously said, in Israel, in order to be a realist, you must believe in miracles.